that, a panel discussion where we'll be discussing the traditional worship culture and juxtaposing it with the contemporary worship cultures and practices that are going on in 2023, I should say. My name is Dr. Chad Brawley, and I'm the lead consultant of the Brawley Group. We are your partner in cultivating vibrant music and worship ministries. We help churches help people worship. I have the privilege as well of serving as the worship pastor at the Luke Church in the Humble area, in the Houston area, actually, where we are building bridges for future generations. So be sure to follow the Brawley Group on all of your socials. It is at the Brawley Group everywhere. All right. Here we go again. It's part two. Part one was so good. We're going to have a part two today. You asked for it. We talked about it in the chat last time, and then some of you have spoken privately to some of us and said y'all really need to do a part two. So here's part two. Part one was really great. Here's part two. This is such a rich and meaningful topic. So I want to say thanks to those of you who were with us last time and those of you who engaged in the chat. The same thing is true this time. The chat is open. Engage with us in the chat. This is an interactive discussion. Let's talk together. All right. We have a stellar panel tonight. All right. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and share one of their funniest church worship ministry memories that you may have. All right. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and then share your funniest memory with regard to church and worship. Let's begin with Miss Jocelyn Henderson, worship pastor from DC City Church.
Yes, Christ City Church. Yes, it's me, Jocelyn Henderson, Minister Jocelyn Henderson. Funniest moment from worship had to be going to visit a church that was near where I was in seminary in Texas. Just coming to be there on a Sunday morning and being called up to sing. I was like, the pastor was like, "You come on, sing." I was like, he not talking to me. But yeah, I went up there, ministered. It went over well. But I mean, I could not believe that somebody was calling me out of my seat because I said before I left home, I was like, Lord, please don't let nobody call me up there to sing. I'm just here to get a word from the Lord. But yeah, that's the funniest I could think of.
Well, that is pretty funny, especially if you were not expecting to
Exactly.
to
The
be called up.
minister.
So, did you have a song in your heart? You got to have your hymn book in your
I did,
Bible at all times.
I sang like I Need Thee and then went into like Oh, I started with Amazing Grace and went into I Need Thee. It was a
Okay.
traditional Baptist church. So I was like, you got to know what's going to go over well,
Right,
let's,
right,
let's go
right.
and get the house, as they say.
Right. Okay. Well, cool. Next, I would like to acknowledge Jovita Shepherd. Jovita Shepherd is one of our panelists. She's not feeling well tonight, so she's not able to be with us. But Jovita, we know you're with us. You're watching. You're going to be engaging in the chat. We love you. We miss you. And we appreciate all that you do in the kingdom and your ministry. And we speak blessings and healing over you. Feel better. All right, let's move to Dr. Tony McNeil, worship educator, choral conductor, and curator of the Call to Worship group.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Tony McNeil. I bring you greetings from Fort Mill, South Carolina, uh, where I am currently an adjunct professor of music and worship at a couple of divinity schools and seminaries. And I thoroughly enjoy being a part of conversations like this. So thank you, Dr. Chad, for inviting me and all of us to reconvene to continue this conversation. And I also want to say good evening to all of you who are joining tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Funny moment in worship happened. The one that stands out the most for me was when I was an undergrad. I directed a church choir in the same town where I went to school. And one of the things we did was we went around to churches and did concerts. And one of the signature things that we were known for at the time was this processional, this a cappella processional we would do from the back of the church into the choir loft to open up the concert. I prided myself in undergrad for having perfect pitch, what I thought was perfect pitch. And that particular night, every concert before that, I had muscle memory of the pitch for this opening song. And that particular night, the muscle memory had shifted, and I didn't know where my voice landed. And when the choir came in, and there were like 26, 27 people in the choir, where there were 26, 27 keys going on at the same time because of me. And it was a long aisle. So we were marching down this long aisle, and atonal, it sounded like Schoenberg, for those of you who know contemporary music. It was terrible. And when we finally got to the choir loft, I ran to the piano and established the key, and the choir kind of fell in. But anyway, I will never forget that. That still like haunts me to this day when I do a cappella singing.
Lord Jesus. So it was unintentionally atonal.
Yes. It was,
okay.
Yeah, it was horrible. It was horrible. Yeah,
Dr.
but we
Tom,
laugh about it now. Even still, when I see those choir members, they remind me, you remember that person? Yeah. I do.
Wow. Petty. Well, that's a good memory. Reverend Nichols, would you introduce yourself and share with us your funniest, fondest memory of worship growing up or in life?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chad, for gathering us in this space. To my fellow panelists, to everyone that's gathered. I'm Reverend Carlos Nichols. I am a multi-hyphenate of things. Theologian,
multi-hyphenate, come on.
Pastor, recording artist. Just finished up my second year as gospel fellow at Bucknell University. Funniest moment. So in high school, there was a rule. I was over the gospel choir, and our advisor told us there was one rule: you could not shout on stage, right? And we had just finished singing. I think it was Vincent Tharp had led something, because Vincent Tharp, gospel artist, also went to high school with me. He got done singing some song, and we just went up, right? But the rule was no shouting on stage. And our advisor, she thought she was going to be smart and close the curtain while everybody was shouting. Well, little did she know that these Black gospel kids in Memphis, Tennessee, was not going to let the curtain be closed. So the people ran out from behind the curtain and started out in front of the curtain, and it has lived down in history as the moment when our advisor tried to shut down the praise break at the gospel choir concert. And when we get together, we still laugh about that moment, and she is still not amused at what happened that day, even though it was like 20 years ago. But it was a hilarious moment. She was little. She ran up to. She tried to close that curtain real fast, and people were like, "Oh, we're gonna shout in front of this curtain."
Right in front of it.
So
that's hilarious.
That's a funny moment to me that I'll never ever forget.
That is funny. I have a similar story, but I'm gonna share it after Dr. Roberson. Would you introduce yourself, sir, and share your funny story?
Yeah. So Dr. Emoji Roberson over here at Oxford College of Emory University. I had so many funny stories, but one that I rarely ever say, I'm going to say now. In 2007, I was at our state convention, and I was singing in the Progressive Missionary and Education Baptist State Youth Convention Choir of Florida. And so I had a hymn medley that I did, and it was like, Father, stretch my hands to thee, I need thee. And so here I am, only guy who got a voice like this deep in the choir at this age. So I'm like, how can I do something a little special? So here I am. I decided to tack on the Lord's Prayer. Now, mind you, wasn't planned. So it was just me, the pianist, she's doing her thing. And before I knew it, I'm over here turning this thing into a dramatization. So I'm on the floor, I'm on my knees. And so I had my back turned to the audience. And so all the people who were standing up, like when I went back and watched the video at that age, I was like, this is so embarrassing. And I knew it was going downhill. But I said, Emorgia, you got to double down and just lean into it. They cannot know that you feel this bad. And it's actually on YouTube, but I made it private. No one will ever see it. There are only people who are there remember that moment. There are two people who always remember that. In addition to that, there are so many other ones, but I'll just leave it at that.
Wow. I'm going to try to find it. I'm going to wear Google out trying to find it.
Oh, you can't trust me. It is private. It is locked.
Well, mine really quick. Some years ago, at church, we run video announcements, and so based on where the announcements fell in the service, they came after sort of a praise and worship / hymn moment. And so I never will forget this. One day we went up, whatever it was that we sang, everybody went up. And so the media team, tried to wait a second and started rolling the announcements. The announcements start, and you know how announcements sound. They sound all commercial and that kind of thing. Those announcements started rolling and those people just went up again. So they stopped. People keep shouting, calm down. They roll the announcements again. People shout, they stop. And this went on like 3 or 4 times until finally it was like, okay, we'll tell y'all the announcements like after church or something, because obviously this is not going to work. And that's one of those things that I will never, ever forget. Just that dance, that happened that day. That was funny for me. So last time we met, we began by attempting to define traditional and contemporary worship. Of course, that didn't go too well because it's subjective. It depends on who's defining it, and it depends on their context. That's something that we kind of agreed upon. So whether or not it's traditional or contemporary, the style, the expression may change, may be different, but the objective is the same, and that's to honor God in our worship, whether it's traditional or contemporary. We also came to understand the value of lyrics, that lyrics are just as important, if not more important, than the style. So with regard to lyrics, one must consider the theology of the house, the needs of the congregation, the ability to inspire, to teach, to encourage and challenge us to go into the world and live well. That was something that was really a big deal last time, is that, after all of the shouting and all of this kind of stuff, what are we empowering our people to do when they leave? Are we empowering people to live well? That's part of the pastoral responsibility that those of us who leave had. We discussed the differences between CCM and gospel music. We discussed the political implications, the musical elements, and the theological perspectives that come with those two types of music. And so we're going to pick up there. We're going to continue the discussion and continue working through that. I'm going to pose some questions, and these are open for everybody to answer. First question is, what would you consider to be one of the greatest strengths of traditional worship? What would you consider to be one of the greatest strengths of our traditional worship? And then same question for our contemporary worship. What would you consider one of the biggest strengths of contemporary worship today, and why? Open floor.
I'll take a stab at it, Dr.
Yes,
Chad.
sir.
One of the things that I hope we never lose sight of, that traditional worship has taught us, is the primacy of the congregation, and the congregation as conversation partners in this holy dialogue between God and God's people, and not just people who come to watch a performance. That's what traditional worship taught me, and that's what I saw practice during my formational years as a church musician in the AME Zion Church. I think that music and worship folks get caught up sometimes in the art and the performance of the art, that we forget that we are doing the art on behalf of the congregation who can't do the art for themselves. And so I think it's incumbent on us to remember that we're not performing for the congregation, but doing worship with and on behalf of the congregation who can't do what we have been called to do or called out to do for themselves. But the congregational and communal aspect of worship, namely congregational singing during the devotion period, where there would be a leader who would line the hymn or speak the words of the hymn, and the congregation would come in and respond on a tune familiar to that context on that text that person just spoke. that was an opportunity for everybody to be involved and everybody to participate, regardless of your talent. You didn't have to audition to sing in the congregation. You didn't have to, pretty voices, non-pretty voices, all of the voices, when they came together, it all made one worship that represented the body. And I hope we never lose sight of that in light of front row singers or front line singers, as they call them. This whole thing with select groups of people in the choir with microphones, and there are others who don't have mics, that we recover the whole sense of sound and whole sense of unity in what we do in worship, in terms of liturgical action, singing, praying, all of that we remember is congregational and not just for the people on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I was just going to say, I agree with you. I like to say that the congregation is the primary singing aggregation. Congregation meaning all of us, together. Go ahead, Dr. Moja.
I mean, the congregation is the first choir, honestly. But Tony said something which made me think about a couple of things, or I guess even the question. Whenever we hear the word traditional, what do we think of, and what kind of connotation and what kind of energy usually comes with that word? But Tony, he went live a couple of weeks ago. I think it was the Easter concert, and the hymn choir. Well, the choir, they were, they were doing the hymns as far as like hymn choir style, and I love that so much, because I often think about, like, how do these people learn this music? Like, when I look at old videos on YouTube and I see the hymn choir sitting on the right side of the church, and they have this wooden floor, and what they do is they'll start off slow, and as the energy escalates, so does the tempo, and they find the way back down, and then they'll build it back up again. And so I often wonder, like, who taught these people? Like, did they have a rehearsal for this stuff, or did they just learn it in the moment? And so moments like that, where you just have this communal experience, are just, you can't, they're different now. I told myself recently, I wonder if there is any service or any concert that anyone has in 2023 where, if we were to take away cell phones and say no one's allowed to use their cell phone for like Facebook Live or any type of recording, what kind of experience would be rendered from that service? And not saying we can recreate what happened in the 1920s or 30s or whatever have you, but I wonder how we would respond as congregants. And so yeah. But I mean, I love the foundation, which is also, I'll say, will be synonymous to tradition and traditional, because that is what we build upon. Unfortunately, I don't believe that we are able to adapt to it as quickly as we can with the music that we have now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be interesting to do a concert and hold all phones, because we spend a lot of time recording service. Recording. I would suspect that there would be more engagement. Probably.
True, very true. And I will, or will there? And I don't know, because sometimes, and I'm biased, because sometimes having the phones to capture moments that aren't always captured are necessary. But sometimes when you have too many phones, it's like, what is the threshold when it becomes too much and it's like overbearing? And I personally don't have the answer for that one.
Yeah. Anybody else want to take a stab at this particular question?
I wanted to jump in and talk about hymns
Come on.
I love talking about hymns. I could do it all day. I was going to say one thing that is a strength of traditional worship is basically what Tony already said, like the hymns and learning them communally. Like, I am weak and I need thy strength and power to aid me over my darkest hour. Guide me to the path thy face I see. Lead me, oh Lord, lead me. Like, these are messages and theology that has been passed to us through this. For me, it was that the red National Baptist hymnal when I was a child. But yeah, like, learning the music is one thing, but learning it in a group of people where we're all singing this music, where it doesn't really matter how you sound, where it's not about do you have a good voice, it's about can you make a joyful noise? Like, I really, 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 really find it a like calling of mine to bring in hymns in my worship context even now. So yeah, I think the hymns and learning theology through the music communally means so much. I remember being at a church a couple of years ago where I was working, and the pastor saying like one of the earliest theological lessons we learned was Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so, because that's a rhyme, a song that we learned as a child, and that continues to play throughout our lives. When the times get dark, when it gets hard, it's like, yes, even if I feel like I have no one, which sometimes isn't the truth, but can be, right? So like, even if I have no one, yes, Jesus loves me because the Bible tells me so. Yeah, the theology is the theology is strong from the hymns, right?
Yeah.
And being able to recall those in our older years, me, a 30 something, in our older years, just means so much more. So yeah, that's one thing that I'm holding on to from traditional worship. Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Anybody else?
Yes.
I, I can't believe I'm gonna say this. So you posed the other question. What are some of the strengths possibly of CCM music, right? I hope people get this on record.
Yes, I'm waiting on this.
I believe that there is a strength in the ability to be creative with CCM music, that traditional does not always afford us, right? I remember having a musician at the last church where I served, associate pastor of worship and arts. And the musician, I want to shout him out, Pharrell Hutchinson, said, quite often when we do traditional gospel, there's no room for me to bring myself to the music. That CCM is so bare that I can bring portions of myself and my creativity, right? And that really resonated with me because a lot of our songs are just, our arrangements, they pack tight. Like there's nothing else to add to them. Yeah, pardon my dogs coming down the steps. There's nothing else that can be added. It's been jazzed up, it's been gospelized, it's been bluesed up, and so there's no room, right? And then when you do something creative, it's like, now you're doing too much, right? And so I think about the ability for young creatives to bring themselves to the music, to be able to incorporate technology, right? To be able to use other methods of integration, right? To stimulate congregations, to stimulate singers, right? That are not necessarily available inside of the traditional context. Because even if we look at our sheet music, right? I love to look at scores of music, and when I look at some of our scores for some of our stuff, it's like, Lord have mercy,
Yeah.
Sister
How you
Beulah
gonna play
cannot
this?
play this. She is not going to
Sure.
be able to replicate this on Sunday morning, right?
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
but then I look at the looseness of other things, right? And like, there's something else that can be added, right? So I think that's a strength of CCM music, the ability to be able to bring something different to those songs, right? And not be so boxed in. And I'll end with this. I think about male choruses, right? And I'm gonna be quiet after this point. When a male chorus learns a quartet song, they are going to say every single ad lib that Lee Williams said on the album.
Every time.
Every time. In the smaller church, they're gonna have it written down on a sheet of paper, because we have conditioned ourselves to say that if traditional music or quartet music, if it's not done exactly like the artist or exactly how it's expected to be, then it has not been done in its totality.
That is very true. And the scary thing about that is, I had this joke that I put on Facebook not long ago. There's some truth to it. Anytime someone sings, Jesus can work it out, people expect to hear those same ad libs from Diane
Yes,
Williams.
sir. Yes, sir.
But what would
Got a light
happen
bill
though?
due, D.
But what would happen though if we didn't do that?
Yeah.
Would people still respond? Would we not feel like we won the house because we actually brought in our own story?
Mm.
Your story.
Okay,
Your story
so
better rhyme.
Okay, Jonathan, go ahead. I'm done.
Okay, so I had the privilege, pleasure, and honor to be up in New Haven a couple of weeks ago for the symposium on the Clark sisters and for the concert. So Dorinda's doing He Brought Me. She was the only person who did like her own music right at the top, and it was just He Brought Me, like that's her hit, right? So she said, I got a new verse. That last one, I don't know what the original lyrics were, but she talked about COVID-19. Thank God I'm covered from COVID-19. But she can do that because that's her song, right? Like she can do that because that's her song. Even if she had sang the original lyrics, it would still go. But you're right about the Diane thing. Everybody's gonna expect to hear that you had to pay rent, all the money was spent, like a little bit to buy some shoes, got a gas bill. You're gonna expect that every time. Shout out to Chicago. But yeah, no, yeah. I think, yeah. Take the liberties. This is what I'm saying. Take the liberties.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Tony.
I think also to continue what Jocelyn is saying is it's the responsibility of the minister of music or the minister of worship to remind singers that you can sing your testimony. I think part of, and I might be getting ahead of the conversation, Chad, part of the crisis of contemporary music is the perfectionism, this unspoken pursuit of perfection that comes with it, and trying to sound exactly like the CD. And from our instrumentalists, our musicians, it's, you're not playing it if the introduction is not exactly like the CD, you're not deemed as authentic. But I think we need to examine the talent talents and the story within that talent, and honor those as sacred, and allow those to be incorporated into the life of whatever music that we're singing, and not feel like we have to take Lillian Lloyd's ad libs verbatim. That's Lillian's testimony. What is your testimony?
Sure.
Yes, because everybody can be on Cicero.
Right. The minister, but my point is the minister of music or the worship leader or the choir director should enable the singer or the lead singer to be creative and to bring their story to the song.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are some things in every song that's universal, and you want to keep those, but at the same time, how can you keep those things that make the song, but allow space for people to bring themselves and their testimony to the song?
Yeah, because some of those ad libs make the song a little bit. Everybody cannot be on Cicero, but some of the stuff kind of makes the song what it is. So
what is the Cicero in your city?
Sure.
That's the kind of thinking that you have to do. And
bring your testimony.
Leader.
Yeah.
And one thing I heard Lillian Lloyd say whenever she was on IG Live, she said before she even starts singing, like she studies the song and she writes down her ad libs and she thinks. I don't know if a lot of us actually think when we sing. We are very good with mimicry. We've done it all our lives in church. We know how to say hallelujah like Big Mama. We know how to dance like like Deacon Frazier. But there are a lot of things, and I mean that's how we learn. But at some point, you should learn to not be a carbon copy of your idol or the people that you look up to. Like, find your you. But we live now like in a society where, and we're all, well, I'll speak for myself, we have we have crystallized perfection. I'm in the airport. She is loud. We have crystallized perfection so much to be on social media that is what we go for. And sometimes, I'm not to say that we shouldn't try to sing the notes right. Yes, but sometimes being perfect is not always necessary. Let us fill your heart. That's all. That's all.
Could I say something, Dr. Morja Roberson? I think you bring up such a good point, right? But I think we mimic because in a lot of our churches we have idolized certain artists and certain conventions as the standard. I'm not gonna say any names, right? Um, we, unlike CCM, we don't write for ourselves. I can't think of any black church writing camps that are writing traditional music. We'd rather go to the convention, get the music that we like, bring it back, and then make that our standard without truly assessing our house and writing for our own house, right? Um, we have a lot of gifted people in our pews that may not even necessarily be our in our music ministries that can help us write for our house, but we don't. Some do, right? But a lot of our churches don't. So we've put this gold standard, and when we found something that works, we want to stick with it because we feel like that'll shout the folks every single time, right? Um, I'm trying not to be too specific, but there are just there's some we've idolized our spaces that we like, and then we bring it into the church, and then we say that that's our church culture. When the truth of the matter is, no, we've carbon copied something else that we've heard somewhere else. If that kind of makes sense.
So originality in writing camps. When you talk about writing our own music and writing camps, I thought back to the Joe Pace records because Joe Pace would write. I don't know if it was a camp that he wrote in community with, but he did do a good job of writing music for the liturgy and writing music that covered most of the moments of worship. But I think you're right. I can't think of many camps that are necessarily doing that. With regard to the perfectionism that has come up a number of times, let me ask this. How do we feel about the shift that went from heavy congregational singing, heavy choir singing, to now everybody has to have a praise team? Many churches have paid singers. Many churches have full-time worship leader. Like, worship leader means a different thing now. And much of this is a new phenomenon because 50 years ago, this stuff wasn't happening. So how do y'all feel about that? Where are we? Why are we there? When did the shift happen? Where are we going? Does it serve a purpose? Did it help us or is it hindering us?
I don't know when the shift happened, but what I can say is that there's always this discussion: how can we be relevant in our churches? And sometimes in being relevant, we try to stay current. Sometimes when we are current, we lose what we once loved. Now, not to say that that's the only way out, but I don't know if a lot of us find ways to reimagine what certain things look like. And I mean, as much as I love, y'all know I love him. I do them all the time, every Monday, Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. But
yes, sir.
My thing about it is, I just don't know if everyone cares. I know it's as crazy as that may sound, people, but now I'm starting to realize how people are also trying to be more inclusive of these hymns. I think about when I was going to say Tasha Cobb, because she had that album called Hymns, a little different. I often wonder about the importance of the choir. Since we have choir stands that are no longer there, they're replaced with LED screens. Once the choir becomes important again, are we going to bring the choir back in the stands? I often think about how churches are built. There are certain churches that are built with music and like the music department in mind. They have a pit. They have the choir stand that can't be replaced. They have the organ placed over here. They have the piano here. Like, these things are thoughtful decisions. But I just really wonder if, as we make these decisions to be current, if we're being thoughtful for the congregation that we have there, or are we just making sure that we can bring in the new people? Because don't forget, the people who are in the church are the ones who actually made it what it is, as we're trying to bring in others to reinvent this experience of worship and praise.
I have a question though. Is it really new though? Paid singers.
Oh,
But
nope. In the white
A little
churches, it's
bit.
not, is it?
A little
I don't
bit.
know.
no,
Little bit.
We had in black churches, well, in my church, in the FINAC, we had nothing.
Yeah, maybe.
Dr. Tony, don't laugh because you know what's up, right? There are plenty of our what I like to call our big sexy black churches that have always paid the 10 or the 12, right? That have to keep it attractive and use those small groups in their hymn chorale, right?
Right.
That are that are on payroll. And I struggle with this, right? Because it's been common practice for years. A lot of our churches just didn't have the resources to do it. But this is something that Dr. Leo Davis, we talked about. And we weren't even talking about paid singers or anything like that. But you can get past having your frontline singers paid if you just appreciate your choir members, right? How often do they walk into the room on a Sunday morning and you got breakfast for them, right? You ask them to come sing all day long and they hungry, and then they didn't shout it, right? Just showing people that you appreciate them, because we have to be like, folks know what's up, right? And they know that certain people on payroll, yeah, it is what it is. But just show people that you appreciate them. It doesn't have to always be monetary, right? Just breakfast. Take them out to eat, Go by their house. When's the last time, that you check on people outside of the Sunday morning experience and outside of the rehearsal? And then a lot of that tension, I believe, and I've seen, can go away. I see it. Yeah. This kind of, yeah.
You see what Jovita said?
Yep.
Yeah. Which is a good point. And that's a point that comes up a lot. If the musicians are paid, we have paid singers, we have paid musicians, we should be able to have paid singers. And that is a valid argument. There's both sides to all of it. Some churches don't pay musicians either. They only use people who are homegrown from within the church. So there are different philosophies, definitely on that.
I do have a question
yes,
for you. Oh,
I was just and Dr. Chad, I wanted to say, in a lot of our non-black spaces, like, people get food. In a lot of our non-black spaces, those musicians are not getting paid.
Facts. Absolute facts. Absolute facts. I know a church here that did it for years and years and years, and that was their policy. And they had it worked. Now, was the quality the same? Sometimes, but it worked.
Yeah.
But does that speak to volunteerism? Does that speak to culture?
It speaks to values. And
on both sides.
Huh?
On both sides.
Both sides. The value of the value system of a church can be found in the budget. Show me your budget, and you will show me what you value, like spiritually and morally and financially. Okay. And this is a thing that often does not get discussed, that there is a capitalist golden thread woven through all of what we're talking about, y'all. There is economics plays a large role in the quality of worship that we experience and the quality of worship that we long for. And some churches have the resources to do some things, and some churches do not. And a lot of what gets financed is governed by the pastor's vision for that particular congregation. And if it is a value of that senior pastor that there be some paid singers, you better believe there will be dollars earmarked in the church's budget, however they may be earmarked, because that is the value of the senior pastor or, whoever makes the decisions, be it the deacon board or some finance committee. It's where are the congregation's values? That's where it starts and stops with me. And that's one of the first questions that I encourage ministers of music when they're interviewing for church jobs or in conversations about pastors, in conversations with pastors about coming to a church, ask to see the worship and arts budget. Is there a worship and arts budget? And when I say that, I'm not talking about the salaries of the musicians. That's not the worship and arts budget. But what are the dollars that are allocated for ministry, worship and arts ministry to take place? And that, for me, is a big signal of what the church values.
Great point, and truth, big bucket of truth. Dr. Mocha, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking, like, if paid singers is going to be a thing, how do we make it seem as if it's not replacing the choir and not making them feel as if they're invaluable or not valued essentially? But if I don't know, do you put them in the middle of the choir so that way they are still in the group? Do you put them in front of the choir so that way we know who the frontline singers are? Do they have their own Sunday where they're just singing by themselves? Because there's also go ahead, Tony. I got you.
That's going to differ from church to church and culture to
Absolutely.
culture. There are some churches that are very transparent about the fact we have some singers here, maybe even from a college or university that's nearby. And that is an internship, if you will, for those students that may come. And it's known that these college students not only are getting financial resources, they're getting experience working in music ministry, and they're helping the music ministry. So a lot of it is grounded in the level of transparency that takes place before this ideology or this practice of having paid singers, is introduced. There's some churches that just bring people in without talking about it. That's where it gets sticky.
Yes.
Right.
That's where it gets political.
Yes.
That's where it gets hierarchical. Okay. I don't think a lot of people would have problems with it if you were just honest about it. And so that means we got to teach. We've got to talk. We've got to walk people through the process. This is why we're doing this. Okay. Wendell, is communication. And 9 times out of 10, if you're honest with people and tell them what you're doing, they'll go with you. That's been my experience. But it's when you juking and jiving and trying to bring folk, slide folk into the section, and people are like, who is this? And where did they come from? And they're leading songs and nobody knows their name.
Yeah.
That's where the ickiness of all of some of this that we're talking about, it derives from that stuff, that politics.
And it doesn't help if the singers who are brought in have a haughty attitude or feel as though we're exempt from church life, all of those kind of things. Assimilation and pulling together the whole group and everybody being one is so important. Jocelyn, you had something.
I was just jumping in as the paid singer on the other side of things. Like, Tony is the person putting the money together, talking to the pastors, making these things happen. I am on the side of I'm coming in. And I've always maintained that if you're paying me to come as a ringer, as a staff singer, I'm going to be on stage the whole time. Don't pull me up to just do the solo, because then it looks a little weird that I'm just sitting off on the side. If I'm here as like a choir, if I'm a ringer for the choir and I happen to be leading a song, let me be up there the entire time, because a lot of times when these churches get the ringers, it's because the ringers are reading music and are giving parts to the other people that are in the choir. We've got 2 ringers in this section. I need you to be seated, dispersed among the rest of the folks, so the people who are having a hard time reading the music can get their note from you. So yeah, I agree with what you said, Dr. Chad, about being amongst the group and not feeling like this is some hierarchical, I'm better than you, I'm brought in for this thing. No,
Mhm.
I'm here to do the same thing you are here to do, to lift up Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah.
To lift
Yeah.
up Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Mr. Wendell said in the chat, or posed the question, what should be some of the qualifications of singers that are brought in? I would say brought in paid or not. What are some of the qualifications? Everybody give one qualification that you would use?
Read music.
Well,
Numero uno.
but what kind of church is it? A church that reads music? Like, and this is
Yeah.
as crazy as this may sound. Do
Yeah.
churches that don't read music, like if I'm just singing some songs that it's your season or whatever, do those churches still bring in paid singers, like even if they're not reading music?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll make sure. So yeah, well, I guess depending on the church. So yeah, read music is certainly one. The other would be just like I put in the chat, like just be nice to people. It's not that hard because your
Yeah.
energy, it certainly will permeate. And the thing is, if the choir is already a community of people, they have that bond, they have that energy. So find your way into the sleeve and don't stand out. Like just be a part of the family.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's switch a little bit. I want to pose this question specifically to Reverend Carlos. Why is gospel music vital for the Black church to sustain? Why is it vital that the Black church sustains and continues to invest in gospel music? And then the second part of that question is, what role can CCM play in the Black church?
Well, I would say for sustaining the Black church, traditional music carries the most important thing that we have to our existence here in these colonized
Mhm.
Americas, and that's the importance of storytelling, right? Um, that does not exist in any other form. Um, Testimony, carrying of oral tradition, right, is what can sustain it and what continues to sustain. Um, I was at Bucknell teaching this weekend, and it was my last week, and I said, okay, we're just gonna go ahead and push the envelope. Let's do quartet this week, right? So I had
Mhm.
a Lisa Knowles song scored for the choir, and let them know that quartet music is actually the only untainted gospel music form.
Hmm.
Everything else has been infused in what I like to say tainted, right? But
Hmm.
quartet has stayed true to its roots, right? As a means of proclamation and storytelling, right? So you're always going to get someone's lived experience
Mhm.
in the song, whether through ad libs, right, or whether through verses, and it's that identification that people's souls resonate with, right?
Mhm.
Why do we like the copycat of Jesus Can Work It Out? Because everybody has just about had a moment where all their money was spent, right? They probably have to buy, baby pair of shoes, right? But those little moments, people can identify with those lived experience moments. And what can CCM do? So, what can CCM bring to the table? And this may not be a popular opinion. CCM is actually preserving our hymns better than traditional is,
Mm. Mhm.
and the lyrical content, because a lot of traditional gospel music, contemporary gospel music, is not hymn based, right? We've
Okay.
moved more towards inspirational, right? But
Okay.
CCM songs, they not writing a lot of new stuff, but what they writing is getting out there. But always somewhere within the CCM song is a reference to one of the hymn staples. And most of your Big Ten CCM songs, what Cornerstone, all of those are preservative of hymn culture, and so. Huh. I'm on the wrong side of the bed today. I'm giving CCM too many props for my taste. But right, but they bring to the table the preservation, right, of those songs that a lot of our gospel today is honestly not doing.
Okay. Okay. All right. I have a question for Dr. Tony. We have been discussing paid singers, and Dr. Imorja said one of the things that will be a requirement for a paid singer will be to read. Going back a little bit earlier in the conversation when we were talking about that, many of our churches, there is no reading. But to answer your question just a moment ago, yes, even in the churches where there's no reading happening, there are paid singers for the sake of the quality or the perfectionism and all that kind of stuff. And with having ringers paid, that has been going on for many, many years, but I've only seen it more with regard to music reading and to bringing in people to help with the classical stuff and the more that approach. But I've seen it so much more now, even in the non-reading spaces. So with the subject of reading, last month, Dr. Tony, you brought up Glenn Burley. And Glenn Burley is, one of our heroes. He's a staple. All of his music has been scored. And I remember back in the day, you go to a workshop, you're going to get the songbook, we're going to read through all the music. And much of his music is not being done now. And I'm wondering if it's partially because much of it is not recorded, just because a lot of stuff just wasn't recorded. And so you have to read a lot to get it. Is that part of why it's not there as much as it used to be? And what I'm really getting at is the value of music education for the sake of worship, music education and theological education for the sake of worship. Dr. Tony, would you address that, please?
Ooh, child, that's a whole hour unto itself, Chad. Jesus, that's part 3 right there.
That's part 3. Yeah.
Music education and theological education, when it comes to, I'm going to approach this as a virtue of worship leadership that to me is a non-negotiable. If you are going to carry or honor the call of being a worship leader or worship pastor, or call yourself a minister of music, or the term folks use now, they call themselves Levites. For me, whatever you call yourself, if you are operating in leadership in a congregation, I think you should be pushing yourself and challenging yourself and perfecting your craft. And not only that, but also expanding your understanding of who God is, and the God that you speak of in this music that you play and teach and sing, and that the performance and the art of it is one thing, but not allowing yourself to expand and learn more about what it is that you're singing, what it is that you're teaching, outside of this is your note sopranos, this is your note tenors, I think is lazy. And anybody that holds these positions, and especially if you're getting paid like these big time salaries that ministers of music and worship leaders are demanding, and you're not challenging yourself theologically and biblically and historically and culturally, I think you're doing a disservice to the people you're serving. Congregations and worship ministries are only as strong as the person that stands in front of them. And you should always find yourself in a workshop, find yourself reading a book, find yourself on social media sitting in a panel discussion or on a panel discussion, or just watching a panel discussion like this, so that you're always growing, that you're always learning, and you're always evolving as a leader. The people can only grow as much as you grow. So I'm excited about the different programs that are coming to front, degrees and certificate programs. And there's so much online education that's out there. Go to YouTube. There are YouTube tutorials that teach you how to read music. There are folks in your community that you can partner with to help you expand in those areas where you are challenged. And that's the other thing, and I'll shut up. You have to admit where you are challenged. and go to conferences and get around people who are experts in those areas where you are challenged and observe them, watch them, be mentored by them. No, everybody will not be able to go get a degree, but that doesn't mean you can't put yourself intentionally in environments where you are challenged. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's great. That absolutely answers the question. Thank you very much for that. Now, let's pivot a little bit. I want to go to Jocelyn. Talk about navigating worship in the multi-church space, because you talked about last time how your church is a multi-church, multi-this, multi-that, multi-that. So help us with that.
Let me bring in the definition one more time. Our church is multi-denominational, multicultural, multi-class, multi-racial, multi-ethnic, a lot of multis, multi-thought, multi-theology. We don't all agree on the things that are passed across the pulpit, but of what
you mean we don't all have to agree to the exact same thing?
And not start another church.
There's not just one perspective, and that's the only thing that's right, and that everything else is wrong.
Sometimes
you gotta be kidding me. You got to be kidding me.
You know, we talked about this a little bit last time. There are artists that I will not sing up on the platform, but other folks will. Anywho, navigating worship in this multi-space. So I am one who likes to keep record. So I've kept record of every song that I've led at a church when I was music minister, worship leader, since I started doing worship in like 2014. So it's this really long, exhaustive list of the things that I know I've done that have not even have gone over well, just a whole record of them. So I find that it makes it a lot less difficult to pull from all of these different sources when I've got this governing document that says this is what you've done here, there, and everywhere. So if I'm trying to think about a song for Easter Sunday, I can go back into this document, or for Good Friday, shall we say, I can go back into this document and see that we've done Stricken, Smitten, and Afflicted, right? Back in this other church several years ago from a hymnal. This is something that we can do in our current context, or even think, is this something I can do in my current context? Is this something that a musician at the place that I am right now can play? Is this something that I can get a multi-track? Thank you, Carlos, for talking about technology. The contemporary benefit is the technology, right? Can I bring this here and it be done well by the addition of multi-tracks or loops or things like that? A click track. We did Easter Sunday with all click tracks, Lord. And thank you, Jesus. It helped us so much. Like being able to stay on beat matters. Anywho. But yeah, doing worship in this multi-church space, I have to have this governing document because it outlines the music I've done in other predominantly white spaces. Because for a lot of my ministry, since I began seminary, I've been in predominantly white spaces. And sometimes in those spaces, I have assimilated to the worship culture that was there prior to me, because that's what they asked of me. Like bringing new music is like, don't do that. We don't need that. Bring us what we've been having. I thank God for transformation. I'm not doing that no more. I'm not assimilating to nobody's worship culture. I'm bringing Jocelyn every time.
Period.
But yeah, so having this governing document 100% helps me. I remember when I was working in Houston, I kept record of what was being done on all these campuses every Sunday. Like, we just did this 2 weeks ago at this campus, so maybe let's not do it over here this week. We just did this one 3 weeks ago on this particular campus, so let's not do it here. Something that because I had that experience, I knew to continue to keep record. Like, if this was helpful back then let's come into the today of things and continue to keep record. Yeah. So that 100% has helped me. And bringing my full self to this worship experience. So even if there's not a musician that can play it, I'm going to do it. Case in point, we did a sermon on prayer, lament and prayer. And I was asked to sing it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And I got up there and sang the John P. Key version because I was like, y'all want me to sing a spiritual?
Come on.
I was like, it's me.
Yeah.
That's the one I would do. Yeah. So yeah, keeping record and being able to bring my full self and to say, this is enough. Me, I am enough for this space.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Great. That's great wisdom, great tools that you have shared. Thank you for that. Dr. Roberson, I have a piece for you with regard to spirituals. You mentioned spirituals in our last discussion, and how spirituals are a blueprint for American music. So talk more about that. Why does it matter? And if you could maybe give us an example of this in something contemporary and something traditional.
Yeah, no, certainly. So I'll start with Africa, as always, go back to Mother Africa. We have so many Africanisms that are in our music that come from Africa. Of course, it's very percussive. Although they had string, and woodwind instruments, percussion was certainly important. But these songs, they would reflect like communal values. So there were songs for everything, for the day of birth, marriage, loss of a tooth, probably. They were very heavy in call and response, which is something that we see in most of our music, honestly. Dance was also something that was very important. And so I think about how it was very polyrhythmic as well too. So I also think about how they took this package of musical material and they shipped it over to the States. So here we are in the Carolinas. And so, whenever they brought their culture, their experience with them. And so like the folk song, and I believe it's 1870, it became known as the spiritual, if I'm not mistaken. But these songs used to convey their deepest like experience. So yeah, then of course in the spiritual there are some hidden meanings as well too. We hear biblical characters all the time. We think about Joshua, Moses, Daniel, David, but there was something that was really important once they came to the States and after slavery had ended. In 1867, there were 3 abolitionists who collected this book of spirituals called Slave, and the book is called Slave Songs of the United States. And they would go to these plantations. 2 of them actually would go. There is William Francis Allen, and then there is Charles Pickard Ware. They would go to these plantations and listen to these songs that the Africans brought over, or that they would essentially sing out there in the field. And so once they had someone to go out there and listen to them, they would transcribe it and put it in this book. So I find that so interesting because that was the first collection that we can say was published, the first collection of spirituals that's available. But then I think about how those elements that we find in the spirituals were used for the rest of American music. Of course, we have gospel, we have blues, which I've heard when I was writing my dissertation. I came across a quote that said, "Blues is like the secular spiritual." And it's so interesting when I heard that. I said, that makes a lot of sense to me. But needless to say, though, so we have all of this, and so, for example, some spirituals I can think about that have a tradition, that are traditional but also contemporary. I think about "Roll Jordan Roll." I also think about "Down by the Riverside," but I think about how Myron Williams flipped it whenever he recorded it. And then Jocelyn just made me think about "It's Me," like standing in the need of prayer. I didn't even think about that with John P. Key. So I say that there are ways in which but there were ways in which the spiritual was reimagined. But I don't know if that's still a practice now. As it relates to the church scene that we're referring to. Of course, in some churches, yes, that's exactly right. And the strains, and because of our survival depended on it. Exactly. I don't know if a lot of churches are really doing that, but when I hear like the concertized spirituals, of course we have the Fifth and Jubilee Singers, John Wesley work, Junior, like how they had this music that they would take across the seas, but only certain churches are doing. So my question is now, how can we still take that and still implement that within our music? But I keep thinking about what what Reverend Nichols was saying about how gospel it can be crowded at times. Maybe there are ways we can uncrowd it. I don't know. I don't know, but I hope that answers your question.
Well, yeah, and I love how you brought up call and response. Call and response is a perfect example of how that part of our heritage is so prevalent in our music today, and it's prevalent in the traditional side and the contemporary side of worship music. So that's a great point that you brought up. Are there any? Let's take a few questions from the chat. Are there any questions from the chat that you all would like this panel to very briefly address, because we run out of time? Are there any burning questions that you would like? Just put it in the chat. And if any of you see it, because we're looking at different versions of the chat in different spaces, so if anybody sees it, bring it to the forefront. Or if you have a really great comment that's gonna enlighten us.
I'm on the battlefield. Oh my Lord.
Are you on the battlefield?
That's our whole music. Amen.
Anybody have any questions? Are y'all seeing questions? I'm not seeing any questions.
Chad, I want to say something to Jocelyn about her cataloging.
Yeah.
I think that is extraordinary that you do that, Jocelyn. I hope you'll continue to do that. What I also think would be interesting is over time, maybe every 3 to 4 months as you're cataloging, not only go back and look at what the song titles and styles that you've taught, but what theology have you been teaching? I think that would be very telling, even for a short amount of time. Like, look at the songs, the music that you selected, for Lent, and look at not just the style, erase the style, okay, but look at the theological content, the lyrics. Okay, what have you been teaching through the songs that you have selected? And how have these lyrics during that 40-day period of Lent, how has that contributed or inhibited the spiritual growth of your community? And have you, during that time, have you told a full story of salvation, or have your songs been partial story? And then where are the theological gaps? Where are the biblical gaps?
Thank you.
You can do that per season, every 4 months, regardless of the season. I just think there's so much you can do with what you have been doing in terms of the cataloging.
Thank you.
I just wanted to encourage you to dig a little deeper with that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I want to look back years ago. What was I singing when I was at that church where I was like, I'm assimilating to the culture? Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
And that's a great challenge for us. That's something else that came up in the last meeting, was that worship is part of spiritual formation. Worship is part of discipleship. We have the opportunity to sing over our congregations, and it's important that there is some theological reflection happening to make sure that we're doing the right thing. All right, so here are a couple of questions. One question that was posed was, will choirs ever return? My answer is yes, but go ahead, Reverend Carlos.
I'd like to jump in that. I would say we need to ask the pastors, will choirs ever return? Because that's who's driving the musical culture, right? Our church, Shiloh Baptist Church, we've got 45 to 50 people every Sunday singing, right? Choir never left, right? I turn into Wheeler, and Wheeler has 555,000 people in the choir. I'm still trying to figure out
in robes. In robes.
In robes.
In robes.
Don't play.
Again, y'all, that is a value statement.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right. That is valuable to that culture.
Yes.
That is valuable to that pastor.
Yes.
That is a value statement. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the other example I want to add, and I think he is doing an amazing work. When I look at fellowship in Chicago, right, and Reverend Reggie Sharp, right, Pastor Reggie Sharp, the LED screen was there during COVID, right, and then they had traditional church Sunday, and that LED screen was gone, right, and the fellowship choir was back. They had 9,000 people in the choir, right,
I
but
saw that.
then right, I was like, whoa, right, and it was like, okay, is the LED screen gone? No, they've done an amazing job with now taking what was happening in COVID, bringing the choir back, and now setting the sanctuary up in a way that it's still a choir, it's still a praise team. The LED screen, it hasn't lost any of the more progressive ways of engaging in worship, right? And it's genius. It's absolutely genius. So I think the question, like I said, the value, right? I think we should ask pastors: is the choir coming back? Because that if there's a church I'm not gonna name it, they put up an LED screen, and in 2 weeks it was gone. They tried to cover up their choir stand, it didn't work because it didn't even look right. But I'll go on mute.
Wow. Yeah, choirs. I think. Yeah, let's ask the pastors. But I think it's inevitable. I think choirs are part of church. I think they're part of our culture, part of our church culture. I think they're coming back. I hate to see our churches destroy the stage, destroy the choir stand, and throw all of that stuff away, because that can affect your choir culture. But I am a proponent of choirs, and I believe choirs are coming back. I'm pro choir. One of the other questions that came up is, do pastors and ministers of music, these questions are actually related. Do pastors and ministers of music work well together? He said, is it better to work together or is it better to work independently? And then another person asked, how come pastors don't participate in worship planning? Now, that's my class at IC3 is about that. So I'm going to not talk and go ahead.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I can't say names. Okay, I was at this one church in South Bend, Indiana.
Okay.
First United Methodist Church, right there, 333 Main Street. So, when I first got there, I was working with the pastor, and it's the first time that I have ever sat and worked with the pastor on service music. Never a day in my life. And he actually let me give some kind of input. It wasn't just you be here because it's standard and I make all the decisions, but no, he actually valued my input, and that meant a lot. And it felt good because even once we're done, I still chose stuff for the choir, but I had a lot of stuff from Black composers who were a part of the program. These people had never heard of it, but he trusted me enough to give me that leeway. So to have that relationship with the pastor who cares really means a lot. Okay, I'm done. All right, cool.
Yeah. Okay.
There are pastors who are very involved
Yes.
in week-to-week decisions about hymns, about congregational singing, and even recommending choir songs, choir selections, or presentational music. There are other pastors who could care less what the choir sings. They're just concerned about the preaching moment. You as a worship leader, choir director, minister of music, Levite, whatever you call yourself, before you accept the job at that church, you need to ask these questions in the interview process. What is the philosophy of worship planning at this church?
Absolutely.
Okay? It's too late after you get the job to try to think that you can turn this pastor into a worship planner who hates planning worship, who could barely, who struggles even just putting a sermon together, and you want him to think about the other parts of the service. So that's a conversation that needs to happen at the interview table.
Yeah.
Okay? And we don't ask it because we make assumptions. The pastors make assumptions about the musicians, and the musicians make assumptions about the pastor. And a lot of times we don't realize what preferences are until after we walk down the aisle and married these churches, and you're stuck in bed with them. So So we need to ask better questions.
Yes.
Learn the way pastors think and the way pastors function as it relates to preparing for worship.
Yes.
And I think it is a missed opportunity when a pastor and a minister of music plan in isolation.
Yeah.
And I for some churches that works for them, and just in case they meet up and some coincidence happens and the choir sang a song that coincides with the pastor. It shouldn't be an accident. It should be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the spiritual formation piece starts to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That spiritual formation, because the pastor and the minister of music had a conversation. And so worship then becomes something bigger than the performance of the two of them. Okay? It becomes something that affects the spiritual development and growth of the congregation. And so, that requires laying down your ego sometimes and listening, both the pastor and the minister of music. And,
Absolutely.
And thinking about the bigger picture, the congregation. Okay, how can these decisions that we're making around music and worship planning, how can it further people's spiritual development and their relationship with Christ, individually and communally?
I would venture to even ask if the pastor would be willing to allow the worship person to engage in sermon planning with them. And so sermon planning and worship planning can be done in tandem.
That takes a lot of security.
I'm jumping in.
God, yeah.
I'm jumping in to say I work at a church now that has a preaching team meeting every week. So even if my music has already been selected, if I've already went to the Lord, asked for divine intervention about this worship set for Sunday morning, I'm coming to the preaching team meeting still feeling like it's not quite together, because I want to be sure that it's syncing up. Where I am now, the pastor that hired me trusts me to plan worship according to what is being preached and what's coming across the pulpit. But that only happens if you're at a church that has an idea of what's happening prior to that Sunday morning. So I'm planning week to week based on what Spirit is saying, what I think is important for the congregation to know, Tony, right? And also, what are the other messages that are coming across in the rest of the sermon? Sometimes I'm in church or sometimes I miss that meeting, right? On Thursdays, sometimes I miss it, but I'm praying to God that things align. And sometimes Spirit does. We batting on all fours, as the people say, but sometimes it don't. Sometimes it just doesn't. Yeah. But I think what is important for me in this position is that I'm able to sit in on the meeting about what's being preached, in addition to me planning worship, not necessarily on my own, but kind of mostly. But coming into that space, knowing that even though I've put these things on paper, they can change based on what I'm hearing in this preaching meeting. Yeah.
Wait, so I'm curious. I've never been in a meeting where a pastor allowed someone to come in and give them some ideas. Like, so are you asking the pastor to not pull out a sermon that they haven't preached in 3 years? Like, you want them to do something else?
Wait a minute. So these preaching teams. So we've got a collaborative team of preachers. Let me start with that. Okay. There are several pastors on our staff, and we've got a preaching team. So the load of preaching is shared between at least 3 people, and sometimes guests when they're brought in. But the preaching, the mantle, the burden of preaching is not on one person from week to week in the church that I'm in right now. So no, they're not doing the one from 3 years ago. Fresh.
I was gonna say, like, my last situation was like that. We sat down, myself and the senior pastor, and went through the preaching calendar and said, these are topics. Will this work? That's not gonna work. This may be a good series. It's not gonna be a good series. But then also out of those conversations came, there has to be some humility to say, hey, I know this is what you're expecting, but that's not my strength area. And I think a lot of times as minister of music and worship pastors and stuff, we have to be honest with saying what are our strength areas and what are not our strength areas, right?
Mhm.
If you're a musician, if you know you can't play a 15-minute praise break, that's not I've got to praise, I got to praise, I got to get it out. You need to be honest and just say, like, we have to be honest and humble enough to say that's not my strength, right? But then I
Mhm.
also believe that that same type of collaborative planning should also come into our worship spaces, right? As worship leaders, as worship pastors. Just because we have the title does not mean that we shouldn't have thought partners or collaboratively plan within our groups, right? One thing I learned in seminary, and I appreciate it, and Jocelyn, you were speaking of this. How often do pastors have members that they sit down with about their preaching, right? And about their sermon planning, right? How often do we, as worship leaders and worship pastors, bring somebody from the congregation, mother so and so, right? Bring a young person to the table and say, these are the things that I'm thinking. And they'll immediately tell you, because they have the cultural capital to say, that ain't gonna work, right? Instead of us get up there and dying an awful death and having to call Willie Watkins to come and put us in a casket because we've died an awful death in the choir stand
Awful.
on Sunday trying to do something that didn't work good, right? And so that collaborative planning can go both ways. But yeah, I think we have to be honest about what works and what we're good at and what we're not good at.
Yeah, yeah. Y'all, time is far spent. We have exhausted all of our time. Let me thank all of our wonderful panelists. Thank you all for being here. I would like to thank those of you who are watching online, who have been here with us today and even last month. It sounds like we need to do one of these on worship planning. That would be very, very, very beneficial if we could do one of these on worship planning. That'd be really dope. Many of you have you've posed some questions in the comments. So I would encourage panel members, if you have time or as you're going through the rest of the day, tomorrow, whatever, go back through the chat and maybe address some of those questions if you have an opportunity. I'll try to do the same thing because we definitely want to try to keep the conversation going and address some of those things. So as we close, I just would like to ask each of you panelists to give us a closing statement, just a word of encouragement or instruction or a word of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience. And we're going to call it a night. We're going to start with Minister Jocelyn Henderson.
Always bring in the Black women. Bring in the Black women in your music, in your presentation, in the preaching. Bring in the Black women because we're here and we're holding the church together.
Tall facts. All right, good stuff. Let's hear from Dr. Roberson.
Yeah, I would honestly, just from hearing y'all talk just in the last 10 minutes, I would just be thoughtful with what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Like talk to someone who knows more than you and don't feel insecure whenever they sharpen your iron. Yeah, and have mentors as well too. Please do that.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Tony is one of mine, hands down.
Yeah, I think Tony everybody mentor. So he
yeah,
too.
He is. I'm gonna probably call Dr. Tony. I'm probably call you this week. I have a few questions actually. I'll probably call you. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Roberson. Appreciate that. Reverend Carlos Nichols, what you got?
I would say resist the urge to be complacent and predictable.
Complacent and what?
And predictable.
Predictable.
Never allow your worship experience to be predictable and that people can anticipate what's going to happen from Sunday to Sunday. If you sang it more than 3 times within the past 2 months, throw it away.
Well, or just set it to the side.
Throw it in the garbage.
No. Put it on the shelf. Use Planning Center so you can see how much you're seeing stuff.
Yeah, let the people want it instead of it always being there.
Good point. Good point. Good point. All right, Dr. Tony, would you please give us our closing remarks?
I thank you, Dr. Chad, for your vision for these conversations. They are so needed. And
Mhm.
I am grateful to hear the diversity of philosophies and also the folks that have been chiming in the chat that have been
Yeah.
responding enthusiastically, around our discussion. Thank you so much for cultivating and curating this conversation. I just want those of us that have been charged with the awesome responsibility for making decisions on behalf of congregations to see it as that, and not even if it's a song, if it's a scripture, whatever it is that you're doing on behalf of the congregation, that you see it as a task, a pastoral task. And I think I used that word before last time,
Yep.
that that is going to affect how people engage with God. That your choices matter, and that they should not be haphazard, and should be very intentional with the idea that the choice that I am making on behalf of this congregation is going to impact their engagement with God in some good or not so good way. So keeping our preferences in check and keeping the larger goal of congregational spiritual formation and proclamation of the gospel at the core and motivation of our choices.
Good. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I echo that, saying that it's very important that those of us who have this responsibility, or anything near this responsibility, that we are prudent with regard to understanding our church, understanding our church's history, our church's theology, philosophy of worship, customs,
Absolutely.
culture, all of those things, as we are making these decisions, and do the best that we can to, as Dr. Tony said, remember the congregation, remember the people. Remember that what we're doing is contributing to people's spirituality. This is spiritual formation. This is discipleship. And this is what God has called us to do. And so we can't just pick stuff that's on the radio just because it's about, but really, really think through what it is that we are presenting to God and to God's people, and on behalf of the congregation every week. That's an awesome privilege and responsibility. So thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks to the panel. Thanks for those of you who have joined us online. Everybody have a wonderful evening, a wonderful week. Continue to serve the Lord well with gladness and excellence. And we'll see you next month. All right. Have a good one.